Let's jump right into the Fellowship of the Ring. And I guess, I don't know, we don't really have like too much specifics planned in terms of this conversation, but
Actually, I do.
oh, well, he does. Okay, so you
Mm.
do. But before we get to what you have, I want to know like take me back to 2001 and tell me sort of about like you going to see this movie and like what your sort of thoughts were about Lord of the Rings. Had you read the books? Were you familiar with the stories? Did you have any expectations for this movie, and sort of what did you take away from it?
No, that's funny. That's actually the last thing I came up with this today when I was thinking about it is how we came into these movies.
Yeah.
Um, for me, I wasn't brought up with the books. I wasn't familiar with the books as terms of what the story was. Um, and all I knew was that it was going to be a great fantasy adventure, and that it had gotten some good attention. I think I was aware of the critical approval of the movie before I went to go see it, but
You were what, 15?
uh 20 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, not to age you, but I don't think you mind.
No, and certainly having seen the trilogy and lived that moment at that age, and I'm sure since you're not that much younger than me, you can agree that I viewed this trilogy as like my Star Wars. Like I was there when
Yeah, that's a good point.
these movies came out, and I got to experience them. And anticipate them, one year after the other.
Yeah,
And I tell you, I was blown away by Fellowship of the Ring.
yeah.
I felt instantly in love with it. I say famously because I say it to myself all the time, but I saw the movie 3 times in the theaters in 2 weeks.
That's
Uh,
impressive.
yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a movie that many times in theaters since. And yeah, I just wanted to be in that world and go on that journey with Frodo and Sam. And yeah, there was certainly moments in there that I was shocked, and not being aware of what would happen in the 2 future books. I was definitely like, oh my goodness, I need the next one now.
Yeah. I've a similar story for me, I guess. I was 13. I didn't read any of these books. I had like a vague familiarity with The Hobbit as a story. I don't know if it was like something that maybe like, was on a reading list that like I didn't read, but like, was a option, one of like 4 books you could choose to read or something like that, at that point.
And I mean, The Hobbit is a much smaller book,
Yeah, which
despite
is
it
why it
having a
would have been
trilogy. Yeah.
assigned versus Lord of the Rings. So I think that like, so I kind of knew what that was, but not really. And then I don't know that I was like super aware that this movie was coming. It was going to be a big, like, huge, massive success. But when it hit theaters, I was like, oh, that look, let's go see that movie. Like, and my dad was into it. My dad liked taking me to the movies, and he was very like kind of plugged in with what was getting good reviews. And so he was like, oh no, like we gotta go see this. So you're gonna love this. And I was like, okay. And we went to see it. I really, really loved it. And I was like, I remember like when I saw it, loving it. And like, then when it came out on DVD, well, the next thing was after I loved it so much, I was like, okay, I'm going to go read those books now. And so we like drove to Borders probably and bought the first book. I can't remember if I bought the first book or the second book, I think. But we bought one of the books and I went home. I started to read it and like I was like, this is so boring. I don't like this book. And so I never read the books. And that was that. But then when the DVD came out, I bought that like, as soon as I could because I couldn't wait to see it again. I don't think I saw it more than once in theaters. I did see the second and third multiple times in theaters. But I bought the DVD and I came home and I was just like, I like didn't know like half of what happened in the first movie. The first time I saw it, I was just like, wait, who is that guy? Like,
Yeah.
that's the guy from earlier, like from The Thing. And I just remember like being like, holy, and you know what it was? I put the subtitles on And I was just
Yeah.
like, oh, that like character has a name, and it's like, a Gandalf. I didn't know. Yeah, Gandalf. I remember. I'm trying to, I don't remember exactly, but there were like people whose names I didn't know. I was like, oh, the one guy with the long hair and the other little
Yeah,
guy.
Liv Tyler, you know.
Yeah, right. I was just like, I didn't know who like they were and how they like related to each other. And so like to watch it the second time, even though it wasn't in the theaters, almost blew my mind more because like I could actually follow the story better. And I think I figured out like, just the scale of everything that was going on. So that like was kind of informative. And it just was a really, really big fan. I mentioned earlier that like I watched these movies, I think, in high school and around, probably for the decade after they came out, once or twice a year probably. And a lot of times like you'd be having TNT or something on in the background, and Lord of the Rings comes on, and your sort of day is spoken for at that point.
Well, especially TNT with like
That was in
5 hours
college for sure. In
of
college for
commercials.
sure, it's just like the TV's on. It's like, oh man, like Lord of the Rings is on. Let's watch that. So anyway, that was kind of my relationship to this movie, at least for a while.
No, I can see that, and yeah, I think for me, I instantly bought it on DVD and watched all the different special features and such, and really became enamored with the world. John, I had talked to you recently
Yeah,
and asked you if you had ever seen the extended editions of these movies,
I hadn't.
and have you now?
I have.
Wow.
Yeah,
So when we get more deeper into the conversation, I can ask you if you feel like, at least with Fellowship of the Ring, if it added anything to your enjoyment of the
we'll
movie.
talk about that. Yeah. So no, I hadn't, and you were like shocked by this.
Yes.
Yeah, so for me, I like bought the first DVD that came out, and like at the time, just I wasn't like a double dipper. And so it was like I had the movie, I was like content. I didn't need like more of it. And I figured I think one day that eventually like I would buy a Blu-ray box set or something to that effect. But like I said, I hadn't watched these movies in so long, so it just was never something that was on my list, even though I know there's probably been multiple editions that have come out since, you know,
Yeah, you
since
last bought it.
2002 that
Yeah.
would have been, very good additions to my, a collection here.
Right. So, on a whole, I think we're gonna take some story beats and just talk about maybe the production as a whole and some of the things that I really found interesting and what I at least connected to on this trilogy, well, rather this film. And certainly, I want you to interject, John. I've shared some of the things that I want to go over on the outline, and certainly where I want to begin our conversation is the prologue, which you can imagine as just like a short film on its own. They do a really great job of bringing you into the world of Lord of the Rings and setting it up for you. Kate Blanchett provides the narration,
Right, first voice
and
you hear.
yeah, and I don't know. I I think like isn't it like the one of the only times that we see like Sauron, the enemy, like he doesn't like appear very often. He's more of a uh shadowy force that you never want to see.
Yeah, right. Like the best you got is the eye.
Right. And but here in the prologue we see him in action and just see his monstrous force.
Right. No, that's great. I think that the prologue is huge. You know that I'm a prologue fan for these historical epics like The Mummy, which we talked about last summer. Love the prologues there that are just sort of like giving you the backstory you need, and in terms of how we got to this place where then the characters are going to sort of be unearthing what we've already learned. And I think that that's very fun, and it works really well here for sure.
Yeah, and it's funny because in Fellowship of the Ring, you can tell that maybe they hadn't developed Gollum's final CGI look,
Yeah.
because he looks kind of rough in this film as
Yeah,
opposed
yeah, yeah.
to when he becomes more important in the two sequels. But you see early glimpses of him trying to claim the ring for himself, and of course Bilbo Baggins finding the ring and going to the Shire. And that's one of the things that quickly changes when you watch the two different versions. I know that the extended version spends a lot of time with Bilbo Baggins beginning to write his book, which
All right, yeah.
is the Here and Back Again book, and talking about his adventures, in which you had seen in now The Hobbit that came out many years after the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Um, and he is explaining what the Shire is, and um, as opposed to the theatrical version, which is just quickly we see Frodo reading and being introduced to the character of Gandalf, played by Ian McKellen.
Gandalf the
Uh,
Grey.
yes, and at this point, he's Gandalf the Grey, and I tell you, I absolutely fell in love with the character of Gandalf.
Yeah. Hard
I
not to.
yeah, I felt I saw him as a father figure, maybe similar to how Frodo um sees him. I mean, certainly Frodo also has Bilbo, but you could tell that there's also that like father figure feeling with Gandalf as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You said this was your Star Wars. He's Obi-Wan. Frodo is Luke Skywalker. And he is definitely, I think, the sort of heart and soul of this particular movie. Shifts around a little bit as we go throughout the trilogy, but I think if there's any character who sort of steals movie one, it's for sure Gandalf. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ian McKellen got an Oscar nomination, and that was the only acting nomination for any of these movies. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. I was trying to do some research into it, and of course, it's kind of fascinating, right? Because of course, when we get to it, Return of the King was so abundantly rewarded.
Yeah, but
It
no acting.
right.
And no, it was no nominations because it won every single award it was nominated for.
Right, and it's just it's so crazy that to imagine that people would celebrate this movie, but yet none of the acting performances were worthy of celebration.
It's funny, yeah.
But yeah, I think Ian McKellen is wonderful in this first movie, and I think I like him as Gandalf the Grey the best because he has that warmth in him still. I feel like he definitely, with his change in the future movies, some of that playfulness is lost as a necessity to
Yeah.
his character.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so once we get introduced to Gandalf and Frodo and the Shire and Bilbo and everything, I was watching a lot of special features, John, and I mean, not recently, but I have, and certainly one of the coolest things that you just don't notice when you're watching the movie is obviously how much taller Ian McKellen looks
Yeah,
than the Hobbits.
right.
And it's just like a lot of forced perspective and camera work, and just like I think I've seen like them move tables, and like how um they had these like extremely long tables and shifted things around when they were turning the camera, just so it was always Gandalf looks so much bigger.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fun levity with he like bangs his head on one of the door frames, right? And it just obviously seems very, very out of place. I was taken with that when I watched the movie the first time, and again, all this time later, for sure, still enjoyed that. I will say that I guess like I think that there's maybe a little bit too much time spent in the Shire if I was nitpicking a bit. And I've always kind of felt that way, but I think it stood out, especially watching this extended edition this time around because we're spending more time there.
Yeah, I
Uh,
can definitely see if if you had a problem with it in
yeah, yeah,
theatrical, it's only going to add to that.
right, exactly. Like I wouldn't say like I dislike it, but for movies that I would say all three are like very strong recommendations on their own as a whole. It's good a story as there is, I think, in movies. Um, if I'm nitpicking, I would say the first hour of the first movie and the last hour of the last movie are bloated.
Yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, um, not. I guess you could also say the final hour of the last movie is that they're filling in a lot of gaps
Yeah.
in both cases. A lot of just like, here's these characters. Certainly, you get the introductions to Merry and Pippin, fellow hobbits who get involved in some fireworks.
Which is also fun,
And
but you know what I mean? But like,
right,
it's a lot.
yeah, it takes a good amount of time, and certainly in the extended edition, even more time for uh, Samwise Gamgee to take the furthest step he's ever taken
Right.
out of
Yeah.
the Shire. That Speaking of that, John, have you ever seen this like YouTube video, which is just absolutely ridiculous?
I'm not sure which one you're referring to. So
So
probably not, but
yeah, so I guess someone spent the time to uh, edit the Lord of the Rings movies so that every time like Samwise Gamgee takes another step in the trilogy, it flashes back to the scene where he's like, "This is the farthest I've ever been from from the Shire,"
that's very funny.
and I think it's like 8 or 9 hours. Like it extends the movie that much, and
Like
I'm
he's
just
a,
like,
a child. Like, are we there yet? Are we there yet?
right. And I'm just like, I watched it for like 10 minutes. I was just like, I can't obviously watch this anymore. But
That's really funny.
it's hilarious, and I highly suggest that fans of the movie should check that out just for a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So we have a lot of introductions in the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, and Gandalf goes on his way to discover more about this ring and talk to his mentor, the wizard Solomon, and Frodo and Samwise Gamgee, Frodo's really good friend, obviously. I had to introduce him.
He's a
Uh,
gardener.
yes, and they're both hobbits, and they're both going to make this journey to a tavern where they're supposed to meet a ranger known as Strider.
I think they're
And
supposed to meet Gandalf there.
yes, you're right. They are supposed to meet Gandalf, but they happen to meet Strider
Exactly.
because
Right.
Gandalf is delayed.
Right.
And of course, the ring wraiths are in there as well.
Yeah, well, Frodo, there's this like moment where Frodo like, well, they're sort of lurking in the woods, right? And once they meet up with Merry and Pippin, they're like on the road, and they say, "Don't be on the road." And so Frodo's like, "We better get off the road." And there's that scene where they like crawl behind the branch, and sort of the ring wraith is right there, and they're just like, ugh. And then there's some close calls they have, but they get away, and then they're in the village, and they should be safe, waiting for Gandalf. There's kind of a creepy guy in the corner, and then there's this moment where Frodo, like Merry and Pippin, I think, are probably saying more than they're supposed to, which is a fairly common occurrence in these movies, especially Pippin. And Frodo like goes over to tell them to shut up, and he falls, and the ring goes flying, and then happens to just land right on his finger, which is no good.
Right, and we quickly learned that this ring has great power, but also comes with it great problems.
We already saw the Bilbo use it earlier in the movie when he's
Right.
giving a speech, and he, exits with a disappearing act. But when Frodo uses it here, it sort of summons the evil forces that are looking for it.
Yeah, and it's funny it how frightening some of the scenes in this movie can be.
Yeah.
Certainly one scene that comes to mind near this segment of the movie is when Strider has finally met the four hobbits,
Uh-huh.
and they are like hiding in a room, and the scene plays out where the ring race are going into, I guess this room
Oh yeah,
in
yeah,
the
yeah.
tavern, and it's like, oh no, have they found the hobbits, and they're going to like stab them
Right.
repeatedly.
Yeah. And it turns out they left that room. They're in a different one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Um,
crazy.
yeah, and there's certainly other moments equally horrific, and certainly uh, that horror plays into um, people surround like wanting to get this ring. I mean, more often than not, it's reactions to the ring that truly bring out the worst in people.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. So at that point, they're with Strider. Strider, we'll eventually learn, is actually named Aragorn, played by the great Viggo Mortensen, right?
Yeah.
And they're following a path. They end up sort of camping for the night atop this. What is it, like an old, like, I don't know what it is. It's sort of like a old, like, gladiator arena or something.
Right. Let's just say it's a stage. It's a
Yeah,
stage for
it's
them
a
to do
stage,
this.
right? Yeah, in the wilderness. And they have another encounter with the ring wraiths, the Nazgul, and Frodo gets stabbed.
Right, and then there's a really cool scene, right? Aragorn decides that he can't necessarily get Frodo the help he needs.
Yeah,
So Liv Tyler's character enters.
Arwen.
Arwen, yes, an
Yeah.
elf, enters the movie, and she promises to bring him to the elf kingdom, and hopefully her father can heal Frodo. And it's a really cool like horseback chase scene.
Oh, it's great. I love it. And then, yeah, right. It's very exciting. She's whispering to the horse. She's whispering to Frodo in different languages, trying to keep him alive because he's slipping into darkness. And the ring wraiths are right on her tail. Then she crosses like sort of the river into Rivendell, and like these like water horses like emerge and chase off the ring
Right.
races. I like that a lot. That was very exciting. And then we meet Hugo Weaving, who we're going to talk a lot about tonight.
Yeah. So I really love what one thing that I guess I had forgotten when I watched these movies. I guess that's the power of these movies, is that they existed before we used CGI so heavily now.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of the big shots in these movies are miniatures,
Yeah,
and
right.
it's like when you do a big scope over Rivendell, it's actually it's stunning. It's beautiful. They did a ton of work creating this city, if you will, and yeah, I love the work that they put into a lot of the sets. I mean, certainly next year when we talk about Two Towers, we'll be talking about Helm's Deep and just how
Ugh.
much went into that miniature. And
Yeah. No, it's terrific. And so we're at Rivendell. We meet up with Gandalf again. He was obviously delayed. He was off trying to, I guess, consult with Saruman, who was another wizard, who was sort of the leader, I think, of their like order of wizards. And Saruman has told him that no, the best thing to do is to just join with Sauron, and we'll be good. And
yeah, get rid
Gandalf
of
says
man.
that doesn't sound good. Yeah, right. Saruman, played by the great Christopher Lee, also played. He was a Bond villain, Man with the Golden Gun. He was a Count
Dracula.
Dooku
Yeah,
in Star Wars. He was Dracula. What else?
Wicker Man town manager.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. I think this probably his most like famous role, right?
Nowadays, I mean,
Certainly now.
certainly,
Yeah.
yeah, because Lord of the Rings. But
Well, yeah. Yeah.
I think a lot of people would also say Dracula because he was in many movies as Dracula,
That's fair.
the Hammer
That's
films,
fair.
if you will.
Yeah, right, right. But anyway, that's sort of like a subplot taking place, but Gandalf eventually is able to escape. There, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, there was more of that in the extended edition, right?
I think there was.
Yeah. I had a
Um,
little bit of just to be totally candid with you and to jump ahead, I had a little bit of a harder time following what was new in the Fellowship of the Ring.
than you did in the other two.
Yeah, and that might have been like there was just less new stuff in the Fellowship of the Ring, but the other two were much longer than the theatrical cuts. And I don't think the difference between the theatrical and the extended for Fellowship of the Ring was as dramatic.
No, and the cut ahead too. I'm glad you said that because, in all honesty, I prefer the theatrical for Fellowship of the Ring.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't notice a huge difference from what I remembered, but again, it's been a little while. Um and so maybe it doesn't add as much, like new stories or depth or plots or anything, but it just sort of like subtly enhances what already exists. It didn't bother me. I mean, there was things about the extended versions of Two Towers and Return of the King where I was just kind of like, ugh. But this one, I was just like, okay, like I guess that was extended. I'm not sure where, but it didn't like stand out either. So I guess that was, I don't know, positive.
Yeah, I mean, I think Peter Jackson has said that the theatrical versions are his director's cut. That's what he considers. You know,
Okay.
he did a lot of trimming and tries to make them as tight as possible. I mean, that could be debated on
Yeah, no,
Return
it's
of the King.
okay.
But I think I think that's why I enjoy watching Fellowship as just the theatrical, because I do think that it has a really uh, tight running time, and I mean that there are certain things that I miss, and maybe when we get further into the conversation, I'll tell you exactly like um, the scenes that I particularly enjoy when I watch the extended edition,
Yeah.
and otherwise, I could probably pass on it.
Okay. Fair enough.
Once they're in Rivendell, Frodo survives barely,
Right.
and they decide that the best course of action is to not use the ring, because that seems to be an impossible task,
Right.
but create a band of warriors, a fellowship, if you will, and who will travel to Mordor and destroy the ring.
Well, there's definitely like a lot of differing opinions. At least they summon sort of all the different, I guess, leaders of different groups in Middle Earth, right? Like there's
Yeah,
obviously a bunch of elves are in like an elvish realm.
yeah, and
There's dwarves.
even this scene in the extended version, I think they spend more time like introducing
Yeah, I think they
the,
did.
the
Yeah.
people who are coming to the fellowship, and you quickly learn like, oh, here are the dwarves, and you say to yourself, having the knowledge of probably seeing Fellowship of the Ring before, you're like, these are probably the last dwarves that exist.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The dwarves. There's men that we meet. Boromir is played by Sean Bean. He's from Gondor. Is it? Do they have people from Rohan here at all? Because that seems kind of rude.
No, I don't think so.
Like,
I don't
like
think they have.
why? That's crazy.
I don't think they have a representative from
Is that
Rohan.
nuts?
Maybe the king is already under the power
Oh
of,
yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah,
yeah,
okay,
in the
that's
second
fair.
one.
But yeah, so there's some men, there's some dwarves, there's some elves, there's obviously some hobbits, there's a wizard, and we're figuring out what to do. Everybody has different opinions. Boromir in particular wants the ring. He says, let's bring it to his father in Gondor and we can use it to defeat the enemy. And Aragorn says that's stupid. And Frodo is the one who sort of finally realizes, like, no, like I brought it here, like it's kind of my responsibility. I should probably be the one to destroy it. It has
and
to be
and
destroyed at Mount Doom where it was
and I think
created.
it's important to note, John, is that Frodo feels this way because of the pull of the ring.
Yeah,
Um, I don't think he necessarily agrees to do this um, if the ring isn't cursed, and he
yeah,
feels like he must um, always be in possession of the ring.
yeah. No, I think that's right. And obviously, like a selection of people agree to just help protect him and accompany him. So that's how the Fellowship here is formed. There's 9, and and they're going to go together to do this.
Yeah, and
It's weird that the Fellowship of the Ring is like created like 2 hours into the movie.
Right. Yeah, right. It's like it's almost like they should have saved the opening titles to like I guess there's like
That would have been bold,
yeah,
right?
yeah, there's a segment where it shows like all nine of them just like walking out of Rivendell and like has like the frame focused on each one of them. Certainly we haven't mentioned Orlando Bloom's Legolas character that much, or Gimli, the
Right.
dwarf.
Who are really like, definitely two of the more entertaining characters, and especially as it pertains to the banter between them over the course of all these movies.
Right. And of course you had the four hobbits and Aragon and Gandalf.
Yeah.
And they they begin their mission. And John, I had to tell you, I I really love the journey of Fellowship of the Ring. I think like why that still kind of exists in um the two other movies. I feel like this one's really like let's have a tour of Middle
Yeah,
Earth.
I had like I was I had that sort of in my notes here. Like I like the geographical like variants of all the different sort of like spots that they go to as they have to like traverse this road.
Right.
Um
Of course, there's a scene where they're like in these snowy mountains, and you
yeah,
have
yeah.
like a shouting match between the two wizards. Um, famously, John, that scene is what I kind of used as some of my basis for my Polygon article earlier this year about Legolas and how he would get on a horse the way he does, just like almost like weightless, because in that sequence he walks on top of snow.
Oh, I never noticed
He's
that.
yeah, so I guess Legolas doesn't have
It's the
that
elfish
much.
way.
Yeah, doesn't have that much weight as an elf. He can actually walk on top of snow.
Good for him. Yeah, no, I like this a lot. It's fun. Like they don't give you a great sense of like where everything is in relation to each other, like how close any of this stuff is to where they started or where they're going, but you get the sense that like it's perilous. The elements are not their friend. Saruman is out there sort of making the elements even less their friend than they would be otherwise. And at some point they sort of say like, we need to make a choice. We need to either go back and cut around, or we can take a shortcut through the mines of Moria. That's what Gimli, the dwarf, suggests. He says his cousin's there. This will be the best thing to do. And they say, let's let Frodo decide. And he says, let's go. But we hear Gandalf. He has like an inner monologue. He's just like, no, don't like this. So yeah, so I mean, this is I would say the highlight for sure of this movie. You could argue if it's one of the highlights of the trilogy is sort of getting to the mines. Yeah, there's sort of a funny uh sequence where they can't get in because there's a riddle. And Gandalf is struggling with it. I don't remember who suggests the I think it's Frodo who sort of like figures it out.
Right.
And so they get in. Then there's this big like sea monster who is like the like eighth scariest creature around in and around the mines. So it's like this is as bad as it gets. No, it's gonna get like much worse. And they get in there, and it's not a mine; it's a crypt.
Yeah, it's just like it's just funny. Like this is how the dwarves lived, right? It's just like oh,
Yeah.
all these monsters around, no
I
problem.
guess they were okay, yeah, right. And they have these like staircases to like giant death.
Yeah. Up to this point, Merry and Pippin provide a lot of comedic relief for the audience, but they also get into a lot of trouble.
I feel like Mary gets a bad rap.
You do.
Yeah, I don't think that he's like as mischievous or as klutzy
Clumsy,
and
yeah.
trouble. Yeah, right. Like causing like sort of real like perilous disasters for everybody. That's like really mostly Pippin, but they sort of get bunched together.
Right.
My opinion.
And uh so yeah, so they're forced in this massive combat scene, and eventually it leads to this pivotal moment in Fellowship of the Ring, where the Fellowship meets a monster that Gandalf has been absolutely terrified of facing. He doesn't believe that his band of warriors can take on this legendary beast,
Right.
and the beast known as the Balrog.
Right. And it's just like a giant. It looks a lot like the thing from Thor Ragnarok.
In my opinion, it looks a lot like early CGI
Well,
because like
yeah. I mean,
he's not very well defined. He's
there's
just
not
like
much definition. It's just like sort of vague fire with like a horned head and eyes.
right.
Yeah. But it's cool. Like, yeah, I agree with you. It's not like well defined, but it still looks cool. It is, like I think seeing again, like props to Ian McKellen for kind of making this work, but seeing Gandalf as afraid of something as he is, feels, there's a weight to that.
Right. As opposed to just like, oh, it's another creature that they have to try to fight and
Right,
climb on
exactly.
its
We just
head.
saw a troll, right? It's like, oh, okay, like, the troll, like, knock him out, like, blah, 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 whatever, arrows, they got him, they're skilled fighters here. But then, like, they, like, are out in sort of the big, like, rotunda, let's say, of Moria, and all the orcs are, like, coming and surrounding them, and then all of a sudden they just, like, all start fleeing, and it's like, uh-oh, that's not good. Even though that's good, that's also not good.
Yeah, yeah. Some shit's about to go down.
Yeah, yeah. So that's, they're doing this, trying to escape. There's like a little break where they have to like there's a gap in the staircase they need to sort of leap over, and it keeps getting bigger. Of course, they do the thing where they save like the most important person to clear it last, which I always think is stupid. Like they're like they should be putting Frodo across that first, and they sort of
Right.
do everybody else. But then comes the big moment on the bridge where Gandalf says like, "Oh, I've got this. Here's the thing," and he has his like, I don't even know what he's talking about, but like his "You shall not pass"
Right.
is the sort of epic line, and then but never turn your back on a Balrog, Max. Come on, come
Right.
on.
Yeah, and he grabs Gandalf and starts pulling him down. Gandalf, for the longest time, I had no idea what Gandalf said in that passage until like I looked it up like
Yeah, I
years
looked it up
later.
too. I just looked it up the other day, and it was just about like basically like there's a dark flame and a light flame, right?
Yeah, but no, like in general, like Gandalf's like "fly, you fools," like to
You
it,
don't know
it,
what he actually said. I thought
yeah.
I was talking about like the things he's saying to the beast.
Oh, to the Balrog.
Yeah, and there's like a dark flame, light flames kind of thing, and that he's a carrier of the light flame. So, but yeah,
The flame of Ildun.
yeah, what right, sure. But fly you fools is what he says. Like, get out of here. Like, don't wait for me. And then we get some slow mo. We get some crying. It's very, very emotional, and I
And
was
having
very emotional.
me
If I'm
too,
being
and having not been familiar with the books or the
right, right.
sequels,
Yeah, didn't know he's coming back.
I was like, Gandalf's dead. I was like, how? No, they can't do this,
I
can
know.
they?
No, way too early.
And then he doesn't appear for the rest of the
No,
movie.
he's gone. Yeah,
Yeah, he's definitely gone.
yeah, it's crazy.
So yeah, that's a huge cinematic moment in that movie, and for certainly, I guess I speak for both of us now, knowing is that it was a big shocking turning point to have a character of that nature get killed off.
It was like the I think part of the reason why I knew Han Solo was going to die in The Force Awakens, spoiler alert, is that like they're on this bridge that looked, I mean, like a futuristic version of the bridge where Gandalf, quote unquote, dies on,
Yeah.
and I was just like, nothing good happens on bridges like this in movies, especially like 2/3 of the way through. um so yeah, so I would say I said earlier that like obviously I love this movie. I think the first hour is a little bit bloated. I would also say that like after this, like that's such a high that like, I think that's still good like left in this movie, but like it feels a little long to get from this point to the conclusion.
Right,
Uh,
because from here you're going,
we're going to the
um,
woods,
yep, and you meet Kate Blanchett's character in person.
which feels like such a crazy aside.
Yeah, but
I
like
mean, it
it
pays
adds
off.
something.
It
Yeah,
pays off. I like it in a bottle, but like it's also just sort of like, what are we doing here? And then she has her like, psycho breakdown,
right.
and you're just like, okay, like time to go.
I mean, like, so one of the scenes that I love in the extended is it takes place here, and
Oh,
it's
me too.
an
I agree. This was probably the best extended scene of any of the extended scenes.
like I like the extended gift giving scene,
Yeah, terrific. Agreed with you. It,
and
it was so helpful.
yeah, it adds a lot to the Ever movies. I think in the original theatrical they just talk about the light given to Frodo,
Yeah, that's right.
because that's pivotal
Yeah,
to Return of the King. But certainly it's nice to see the Ever characters get their gifts and um, help explain a little bit about them before they go off, and you get some comedy in there as well. So I do appreciate that. From there, that Frodo learns from Galadriel that he's probably gonna have to split up the Fellowship
right.
and go off on his own in order to destroy the ring. No matter how perilous that might seem, one hobbit making his way to Mordor, he has one more confrontation with Boromir, is determined to take the ring for himself and for Gondor. Boromir isn't able to stop himself. He pretty much really confronts Frodo and tries to take it off of him.
Yeah,
And so Frodo kind of tests Aragorn too to see if he would take the ring from him if given it. And I guess Aragorn passes the test in Frodo's mind, and Frodo leaves, and a giant battle unfolds to pretty much end the movie, and
yeah,
the Fellowship gets separated. You have this great final scene, I think, with Samwise swimming after Frodo, and
yeah, yeah,
it's very, very heart wrenching. It's like, oh well, Samwise is like, I can't swim. You find out he can't swim. He's just
yeah. He's
walking
like
to
gonna
his death,
basically
pretty
drown.
much.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's very
uh,
sad. I not sad, but just sweet.
yeah.
And Boromir does die. He dies like he realizes that he screwed up and ends up um sort of sacrificing himself in a way to save Merry and Pippin, who are about
Or
to
what he
be
believes to save them, because
sure, yeah. But he tries to do right by them and ends up succumbing to some bows and arrows. And
from the Urukai.
yes, right. We'll spend more time with later. And yeah, that's kind of a wrap, right?
Yeah, that's the movie. We leave the Fellowship kind of disbanded, other than Frodo and Sam now together.
Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli are going to go. They say, "Well, we can't help Frodo and Sam; they're on their own, but we can go try to save Merry and Pippin."
Right.
So that's
Uh,
their mission as a trio, and our duo is off. Do we get a glimpse of Gollum at the end?
I don't think
I
so.
don't think so either. In my head, for some reason, there was like, that he was sort of stalking them at that point. But we will meet him very soon. It's a real good movie.
So you would probably put this what as your second favorite, just because you think the beginning is bloated? Is that why you feel that way,
I would
or
say it's my second. It's definitely my second favorite. Two Towers is my favorite. I just think that the Two Towers doesn't have any fat. It's just I'm compelled from everything that's happening. The extended edition has some fat. I'm compelled from everything that's happening in that movie from start to finish. And I would say I'm pretty compelled by almost everything in Fellowship of the Ring, but I don't think that the beginning and some stuff toward the end, it's it's not as clean of a a path to from beginning to end there.
Right.
And then
For
Two Tower
me,
or three, Return of the King is three.
yeah. For me, I always loved Fellowship of the Ring the most.
I
I
think
just
a
like,
lot of people do. I don't know what the like general opinion is, but I feel like I've mostly seen people saying that Fellowship of the Ring's number one.
yeah. I mean, like I mentioned before, like I like the journey. I like the idea of the start of the journey, and just all these characters meeting together for the first time, and I like the way that Gandalf is portrayed in this movie the best, and um, maybe just the interactions between the characters. Of course, Merry and Pippin don't really interact with Sam and Frodo in the other movies, and of course,
Yeah,
the Fellowship is split up, so you don't really see these characters interact um, together that much. I mean, as far as
Frodo
like
and Sam,
Frodo, yeah,
nobody
Frodo
else
and
is going to
Sam,
see them until the very end.
yeah, and until the finale there. So,
Yeah,
um, yeah, I like the interactions between these characters that is present in this movie. Yeah, and no, I really dig this. John, as a whole, so you didn't think that the extended added too much to this one? If you went
well,
revisited, you probably would watch the theatrical again, or
I to be honest with you, like I'd be inclined to watch this extended edition before I watch any of the other extended editions, only because
oh, really?
like what I want out of an extended edition is not like just more scenes and more things that like are just adding to the runtime, which I sort of felt like the other two were. This one just it felt like it flowed better, and like the extra scenes were like part of a whole that I already knew and was familiar with. So it's like I didn't notice them as much, but they didn't stand out like a sore thumb. Like there were moments watching the other two extended editions, and I don't remember if I said this, but I did watch all three extended editions over the last like week. Um,
And those are very long movies to begin
it was
with,
a
but
lot. It
they're
was a lot. It was a
extra
lot.
long.
Yeah. But this one, it just well, like the other two, there were when the scene comes, it was like, oh, this is not in the movie. You know what I mean? Like I knew right away. I was just like, oh, this is an extended scene. Oh yeah, yeah, this is
But
extended.
is that because of your familiarity with the other two, or
No, it's
just
because I felt like they stood out as unnecessary.
okay?
Like the ones in this edition, I felt like added context instead of just adding more stuff and more time.
Yeah, no, I'll be interested in next year and the year
I'll
after
rewatch and we could talk,
to
yeah, but
to talk more about, because I know there's, I feel the same way about you about the extended editions in general, where I feel like for me there's certainly ones that I'd pick out and say, yeah, I'd like to see these included with the movie, and then
yeah,
there's others that I would toss aside, and
sure, yeah, yeah,
it's just unfortunate that uh you can't really do that with a movie and just say like, oh, these are the extra scenes I like and these are the ones I don't. It's like
right. That'd be kind
you're
of
kind
fun,
of
but yeah, no, it's
yeah,
not really a thing.
you're kind of stuck with like, oh, did you pick the theatrical this time or did you pick the extended? And
Yeah,
for whatever good or bad is, and both, that's what you're stuck with.
yeah.
But yeah, great. I was really looking forward to this talk about Fellowship of the Ring.
Me too.
Um, I feel like, uh, man, I've seen this movie so many times, but I still really love it. Uh, all the silly trivia or how it's made, always excites me. I know, like, another reason for the extended versions for people out there who have never actually double dipped and like special features, the extended editions offer like so many like special features on like on the original like DVD releases. I don't know. I had an extra digital code that I shared with John, so I don't know if he got like all the appendices and special features that they have on included with some of these sets, and they just go into extreme detail of like uh, putting together the sets and the digital aspect of it, and these were really groundbreaking movies. All three movies were made I think around the same time, and it's just like they had to be made, right? It's just not, they didn't like just say, oh well, we're gonna like only shoot Fellowship of the Ring, which is funny because we just had Dune, right? And they waited to announce the second half of that movie, and you're just like,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
what are you doing?
No, I mean it was kind of like a wild thing, right? At the time, like what was New Line Cinema released these and they said, here's the money you need to go to New Zealand and shoot all three at once. And like the studio, if these movies weren't like huge hits, like New Line was going under, and eventually they did go under, but not because of these. Like these movies extended its life like 10 years, and then after that, like we're movies we're going to talk about soon is the Matrix sequels, which there was like, okay, go do both of those at the same time, and we'll release them within 6 months of each other. And I felt like for a while that was like a thing. I remember the Harry Potter movies. There was talk, it was like, oh, these kids are going to get old too quick. Like we need to shoot these back
Right.
to back, which they ended up not doing. I think it was fine, but that was a thing for a while, and now it sort of feels like you could never ever even imagine doing that unless I guess you were Marvel, but Marvel doesn't have to do that. Like it's a risk to do it for
Yeah, I
the
think they did.
creative team.
I think they did Infinity War and Endgame, right? Pretty like
Yeah, probably.
similar.
Yeah, but I feel like for the creative team, it's kind of a risk to do. For the actors, it's annoying. Um, like you don't get the benefit of like learning how something works, right? Or saying like, oh, this scene was good, so then we'll release it and then the fans will love it and then we can do a riff on it in the sequel or whatever, it's just sort of like we have to create this whole thing and hope that everybody gets what we're doing. And this is the best example of that imaginable. And now
Yeah, and
you're right, like Dune has to come out and be a hit for part two to be able to get greenlit.
right, and I mean, what is also a big risk on the filmmakers here, Peter Jackson and New Line and everybody involved, was, what if this first movie didn't hit? You're kind of stuck with the two sequels, and since they were filmed around the same time, you kind of know what you were dealing with, right? It's not like they were gonna make vast changes to the material or like
Yeah.
switch what was going on, and certainly narratively in the next two movies, Peter Jackson made decisions to put events at different places in order to make at least the third movie more exciting, because I think most of the action in the book trilogy takes place in the second novel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the third novel is pretty much just wrap up.
Yeah. I haven't read them. I did not know that.
Yeah. I like, for example, I mean, anybody listen to the podcast probably knows this is like, Shelob, I think, is in the Two Towers. She's
Wow.
she's not in Return of the King.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so she's like a pivotal.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's kind of it for Fellowship of the Ring. Let's talk about the Two Towers. Now, I said up front that I just watched this. I didn't watch the first in lead up to it or the third afterwards. Last year, I watched the first movie in the franchise, and I just like couldn't help but like watch them all in succession. But I wanted to kind of do this like in isolation, because one of the questions I had was like, does it kind of like stand up on its own as a movie, or is it really just a chapter of a big story? I don't know that I really got an answer to that. I think that it's a little bit of both, but I do still really love this movie, and I think that it's definitely my favorite of the three. Do you want to talk a little bit, just kind of set it up and sort of tell us your big picture takes?
Yeah, sure. And John, you are far better than I am in this case, because I did not entirely do my homework. I did not watch Two Towers this year.
You've seen it. I'm presuming that we can
yes,
have
I've
this
seen
conversation.
I've seen it dozens of times.
Yeah.
I did do a kind of like a recovery in my mind of the major beats and make sure I remember the characters and what goes on here. And
Sure.
I'm pretty sure that I feel comfortable talking about Two Towers. So my history with the movie, famously, when I saw Fellowship of the Ring, I was blown away. I think I saw it like 3 times in theaters,
Yeah.
and then Two Towers, I also very much enjoyed. I think I saw it twice, and then I was looking forward to like Marathon Day. They had this big promotion
Oh,
with
sure. Yeah.
with all 3 movies, and there was no way I made it. Like I think I ducked out like halfway through Fellowship because I had seen the other 2 movies like so many times.
Yeah, right.
And I just came back for Return of the King because that was like the premiere. And no, I think Two Towers works. I find it an interesting thing for you to do, John, is to try to watch it without the Fellowship or Return of the King, because it's kind of hard to take out of context now, because in your mind you can fill in the gaps of what comes before and what comes after.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it doesn't require me to watch the first one anymore to understand everything that's happening in the second one, because I've just seen these enough times and kind of marinate in the story that that's okay. But to kind of set it up at the end of Fellowship, there's like these different parties. Everybody's kind of separated a bit, and you have Frodo and Sam still trying to make their way to Mordor, but doing so alone until they meet up with Gollum, who's kind of tracking them, trying to get a hold of his precious. And it's the first time we really spend time with Gollum in the franchise. He's seen like in very, very kind of small bits and pieces in the first movie, but here he's like a fully fleshed out character, and really one of the reasons I think this movie, works so well. And then separately, Merry and Pippin have been taken by some Uruk-hai, and are being brought to Saruman. And I think the thought that they were the halflings that were supposed to be brought to him, but they grabbed the wrong ones, and eventually they are able to escape and get into the forest, and are picked up by some Ents, including I believe his name's Treebeard.
Yes,
the sort of leader there. And then finally there's the trio of Aragorn and Gimli, sorry, Legolas, and they are trying to get Merry and Pippin back, because they, sort of decided that Frodo and Sam are on their own path, and the best thing we can do right now is try to get the others. Of course, Gandalf is the other, outstanding member of the Fellowship, because Boromir is the ninth person. He died, and Gandalf, we presume, died in the first movie when he fell, after the "You Shall Not Pass" debacle, I guess. And but the first scene of this movie, we see that he did actually survive, but his kind of whereabouts are unknown, after he fights and destroys the fire beast,
the
Balrog. Yeah, right. That's kind of like the setup for everything. We end up spending a fair bit of time going into Rohan, which is sort of this like new land that was undiscovered and really not even talked about in the first movie. It's like a realm of men, and they are like horse lords, I believe, where they like all ride horses and love horses, not in a way that's like weird, but like in a way that's pretty normal.
Not in a bestiality way, but
yeah, it's not like they're not like the characters of Warhorse. They're all like pretty normal guys and gals around horses, so that's good. But I'm joking. Theoden is like the king of Rohan, and he's like kind of under a spell, and very like crusty. And then he's really crusty. It's like the only way to describe it. And he's played by Bernard, I think his name is Bernard Hill. who is the also the captain of the Titanic. So he had like a nice little Christopher Lee-esque run of being in blockbusters from 97 to 2002. And then there's Eomer, who's played by Carl Urban. He is like one of the sort of lead writers of Rohan. And then Eowyn is Miranda Otto, and she's she's Theoden's niece, right? And
New
she
love interest.
she will become a love interest, yeah, like sort of, yeah. That's a little bit murky, but and then the other like kind of big new character is Faramir, and he's the brother of Boromir, who was Sean Bean in the first movie, and Faramir is like the less. His like sort of storyline is more fleshed out in the third movie when we meet his like crazy dad. But
Right.
he's like, kind of son of the steward of Gondor, and like not really as respected, and so he like wants to do something to bring glory to his name, and ends up kind of encountering Frodo and Sam and thinking that using them to win his father's approval is a good idea, but sort of talks himself out of that. So those are like all the major new characters, I guess. And I think for the most part they're all pretty relatively interesting, at least. I think
Like it now, what is like Wormtongue? Like, is he like new to the second movie? I think. Like,
I believe so, yeah. So he's like the guy who it has Theoden under this spell, and he works for Saruman. So he's like allied with Saruman, who's Christopher Lee. And Christopher Lee is really like the main villain in this movie. It's kind of an interesting situation because in the first one he's like established as an ally who becomes like a villain, but he's always like kind of like serving Sauron, right? Like it's always like
yeah,
Sauron is number one, and then Saruman is kind of like his helper. Uh, but this movie like is all Saruman. Like Sauron's like hardly spoken of, and not really a major factor. It's all kind of like our heroes versus Saruman, and I feel like that kind of works well because like we never really see Sauron. He like
yeah, he doesn't have a face. He's not
his
like a
teeth
guy.
in deleted scenes, but that's really it. But no, I think that like having like a villain that you can kind of like see him in action
Very
is
helpful. Yeah, I
well.
agree with you.
Yeah. So that's really good. The like really, I think the biggest like thing here is the Battle of Helm's Deep, and it's very far into the movie. It's the concluding like half hour roughly. But at the time, I mean, you I'm sure remember well. Like this was like heralded as like the great action scene of, one of the greatest in history. Like of how big it felt and how much is going on, and I guess I'm kind of like, I know you didn't watch this movie like very recently, but like, do you feel like whenever the last time you saw it was like that it kind of holds up well?
Yeah, I want to get into Helm's Deep in a little bit,
We'll
John.
save that. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah,
So the other big piece of like VFX that's important in the movie I mentioned earlier is like we're spending time with Gollum really for the first time, and this was like I feel like our introduction to Andy Serkis in a lot of ways, right?
yeah, and like Weta Digital's work
Yeah,
on this movie is pretty phenomenal, and the CGI work. It's like you can see it nowadays when you watch the movies because like you know what to look for.
yeah,
But back then, I was like, other than the obvious stuff, right? I was like, where's their CGI? I remember like there's scenes where like the actors will look like really small and they'll run against the backgrounds, and like for a long time like I didn't register that as like them being 3D like CGI
yeah,
versions of them. I thought like, oh, this is just like a really far shot and
yeah.
you can't see it. But certainly modern video technologies have made it so these images are sharper than ever, and so yeah, you can catch some of that CGI more so. But yeah, I think Andy Serkis' work as Gollum, if that didn't come to pass, if like they couldn't figure that out, these movies wouldn't be half the movies they are.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. He is like probably the MVP of, you know, I don't know if I want to say like the whole franchise, but I feel like he plays such an important part in so many ways, to the plot, like to just the quality of the movie and how much he brings. I feel like it's just like this iconic kind of performance and voice and everything, and like it kind of transcends like the Lord of the Rings and the movies, um, where it's like you can hear it, when you think of it. It's just kind of interesting. Um, and it's just it felt like to me, and obviously I was young and not like super plugged in, but like this was like the first recollection. And I read like a lot of like Entertainment Weekly and stuff at the time. I felt like this was like the first time where like people were talking about this, like you like you mentioned, Weta effects, like I'm sure they were working before the Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, but like this is my first recollection of that stuff in like the dialogue about a movie, so I feel like it was super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it was some groundbreaking work. And it's funny, like I want to know, John, um, when I asked you into this project, you said you had never seen the extended editions of these movies.
That's right. Yeah, I didn't. I
And
watched them all last year. I did not watch the extended edition of Two Towers this year, but I have now seen all of the extended editions. But it has been a calendar year since then.
so you still prefer just the theatrical cut as opposed to
For me, it
doing the
wasn't like
extended?
prefer. It was just a matter of like trying to squeeze in as many things as I could before we were recording, and I felt like the extra half hour I could get back would probably be good, whether it was for sleep or something else. Um,
Sure, sure, sure.
so,
But at the end of
to
the day,
me, yeah.
do you find that the extended edition had a lot of things that you appreciated at the
So
same time?
I do remember because I was thinking about this. Like when we talked last year, and I watched all of these, I remember telling you that I felt like I didn't feel like the extended editions were dramatically better than the theatrical editions for any of the movies. I felt like the material that was added to the Two Towers, I felt like kind of served that movie the best versus the other two, because I didn't feel like the extended stuff in Fellowship of the Ring was like particularly memorable or important at all. And I felt like the Return of the King is already long enough that like it didn't need more material. So I felt like the Two Towers kind of had like the appropriate middle ground of like it's not like creating this like unfathomably long watching experience, and also the scenes they're showing us are you know hefty enough where I'm like, okay, I can see why this is included here, and I think I'm glad I watched that. So if you're gonna
What
watch one
what
extended edition, I'd say do this one.
Yeah, one of the scenes that I really like in this extended cut is Theoden's son gets
Yeah.
killed, and Theoden doesn't really know that at the time because he's under the spell. And once he's healed, he has a true funeral for his son, and it's just like a really great scene. I was sad that that one was cut, and John, it's for me, it's like not every scene that they took away is like something that I'm like, oh god, I missed that. But then like if it was me and I could pick and choose, that would be like the ultimate. I
Yeah.
guess like there's like some extra stuff of like Merry and Pippin like after the battle at the end of the movie where they're just like smoking, or I'm just like, yeah, this is okay, but I didn't need this.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that there was a lot of those for me in the first extended edition, because there's so much of that movie is like the party scene in the Shire and stuff, and I felt like that stuff gets like blown out, and I'm just like, okay, like I don't know that I needed more of that. It's fun, but it's not like super relevant. So I don't know. I think that like this one hits the right notes, and I agree with you. I remember watching like the funeral and like, thinking that was nice. And my kind of general thoughts on like most of the Rohan characters is like I found them interesting. I think everything that happens with them in this movie is pretty interesting, but like there's not really like a major like emotional attachment to any of them. I feel like that kind of happens in the third movie because it's like you'd spent some time with them now, and it's like, oh yeah, I like those guys, like they're all right. And I feel like maybe you would have gotten to that quicker if you had kind of like that funeral and everything that sort of goes with that story, like a little bit more prominent in this movie.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, so I think that those are, some of the bigger points of the Two Towers. The Gandalf, as we mentioned, is back. He is Gandalf the White now instead of Gandalf the Gray, so he's got like a nice new look, kind of a glow up for our
Do
guy
you do
here.
you do you think like the way that do you think that the way that he's portrayed now in the second one is that he's less warm? Because like some part of me is like him when he was playing Gandalf the Grey, he was like more like, oh, your best friend or your grandfather who you haven't seen in a long time and you want to be friends with, and then like once like he falls and gets into that battle and becomes Gandalf the White, it's like, oh, he's all business now, and
I mean, I think
he has a slight turn.
I think the difference is that like his sort of emotional connection is to the hobbits, and like he really doesn't spend much time with the hobbits in this movie. Like he eventually is gonna, I think, in this. Do they even reconnect with Merry and Pippin in this movie, or does that happen later?
No, it does happen.
Okay, yeah, but he's not with Frodo and Sam at all. And I feel like
No,
so it's more like business with like Legolas and Aragorn and everybody. So that's kind of what you're getting. But there's also like a weird moment where like when he meets up with them again, and they're like Gandalf, like blah blah blah, and somebody said Gandalf the Grey, and he's like, oh yeah, that's what they called me, or something like that. And it's like almost like he's like a little alieny. It's
right.
like you don't remember what your name was. uh, so yeah, that's like kind of strange, and I don't feel like that was well like kind of explained or developed, because like otherwise like he's not like, who are you, it's like he doesn't remember his own name, but he remembers all these other people, and like every
Yeah.
like political thing that must be remembered about this entire world. So yeah, it's a little bit of a like weird characterization, I guess. And then he does like also disappear like for a very long time, from like basically like the halfway mark of the movie till the very end.
Right, because he has to go find the horse riders.
Exactly right. Yeah, yeah. He has to meet up with some of our other friends here. So, the score of the movie is like really good. Howard Shore obviously composed it. Is there anything that you feel like from the scores of like the three movies, like do any of them kind of stand out over the others?
Well, the thing was that I loved about the Two Towers score, John, is like the theme that he made for Rohan.
Well, okay,
I think
yeah,
that
because I totally agree with
I
you. I
think
think
that that's really
it's one
yeah.
of do 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 do.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, yeah. I love that.
I love that too. It's one of my favorite like musical, compositions and like movies in general. But certainly, like I love that the most about these movies for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, he did phenomenal work for all three movies, but that in particular stood out for me with Two Towers and some of the other sounds he made. It's funny when you get these movies and they're scored well, you can't like imagine how anybody else could score them differently, and I watched like maybe 3 episodes of the new Rings of Power TV show, and
Yeah,
Howard Shore only does the theme song. He doesn't do like the main score for the show. I think like uh, forgive me if I'm wrong, audience, but I think like Bear McCreary does the score for Rings of Power, and it's fine, but it's just not the same memorable work that Howard Shore did.
yeah, that's too bad, but yeah, it's also really like kind of hard to live up to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's the equivalent of what like John Williams did the first Harry Potter movie, and then like he set the tone for all of them,
Yes,
and they just reused it.
yeah, basically, yeah, with like little variations here and there. Yeah, but yeah, no, I think I'm glad that you felt the same way about the Rohan like music cues, because I think those were really fantastic. Um, I think we're kind of at the point where we gotta do the Helm's deep dive.
The deep dive into Helm's Deep.
Exactly. So, what are some of your thoughts on this, like, yeah, very, very extended action sequence?
So it's funny that Theoden has like he recites a poem that like it's in Tolkien's text, and it's funny. Like I'll recite the poem to my wife like all the time because I'm just like
Oh, wow, this is
this is
romantic.
yeah, this is so cool, and she gets so tired. I'm like, where are the horses with the riders? And she's like, stop. Yeah. So yeah, I love how not only is the battle itself great, but like the lead up to the battle, right? There's a lot of uh goings
Yeah.
on to it, and you have the planning. They said like, oh, they shouldn't go to Helm's Deep because they'll be stuck there, and
Hmm.
this whole army's coming to attack them, and they're just hoping that this impenetrable fortress will save the day.
There's a lot of
And
really like they I think do a really good job of kind of like developing the geography of it. So it's like before the battle starts, you understand that like there's I like I'm not going to recall all of it, so I'm going to sound like an idiot for saying like they make it memorable. But like there's this part where you're like you can't let them get past, and here's where everybody's going to be, and then the arrows are going to come in from this area, and then you have to stand behind the door with the swords. So it's like you sort of feel like you understand like their battle plan, which I think is just kind of fun. um and Yeah, I think that like there's also some really good human moments where there's like a young boy who's like fighting, and he's much younger than you'd think a fighter should be, but he has to do it. And Aragorn gives him his uh, uh, armor plate or whatever, and just kind of humanizing him further. And I feel like that stuff is really good. And the elves show up, and there's this moment of like, the elves and men will stand together once more and such, and sort of like, okay, maybe we can actually do this. We got the elves on board.
yeah, and it's just like it's funny, John, because like I'm a person who's watched Game of Thrones, and you watch that and you're like, oh, they tried to do an epic night battle too, but you couldn't see anything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
right. Oh my god, what a disaster!
Yeah, so like here we are years ago with Two Towers, and they do like this epic night battle of rain, and you can still pick things out. They still managed to do a really entertaining night battle without like having to make it so you couldn't see it.
Yeah, no, it's really well lit. It's um, I think that the Urukai are like really well kind of designed creatures as well. And we see them in the first movie. Obviously, these are like the like orc sort of hybrids that Saruman is like growing underground. It's like very, 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 very weird. But I think that they're good, and there's some like they have some moments too, which is kind of fun because it's like a lot of like back and forth of like we won the first like little volley here, but then we got one over on you because we blew up your retaining wall, and so on and so forth. So it's like it just keeps going on, and
And John, I really like the different siege weapons that the enemy brings. It's like first they bring like ladders, and then they have these like tower things that they can get up to Helm's Deep, and then of course they have the weapon X, which is like the bomb to like blow up part of the wall. So I like how that keeps building too.
yeah, no, that's all really good too. So I guess the one thing like I would say is that like the scaling definitely doesn't seem like as seamless as it did to me when I saw the movie back in 2002, and like that shouldn't, I guess, be a surprise. But like I always thought of this movie as kind of like almost like Helm's Deep, where it's just like unimpeachable. Like you can't say a bad thing about the CGI. It's like I can't believe they did this. They'll never top this. And I will say, like they've definitely topped it. It looks a little bit dated, but not so much that like it takes you out of the movie, which I appreciated. And obviously there's a lot of fun interplay between Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas, in particular the last two, and and they're kind of counting their kills, which carries over into the next movie. And that's all good stuff. And then you get finally kind of building up to this, like, hey, we lost, and let's ride out, let's kill as many of these MFers as we can. And that'll be our like last like moment of glory. And then just as they do, here comes Gandalf on the seventh day or whatever it was that he said.
Yeah, the light on the seventh day. Yeah,
to the east or something. And he's there with his horsey riders, and that's it. And then we win. We don't see it, but it's just like we're understood that's all that needed to happen.
And it's really interesting that at the same time that's going on, they're really showing Merry and Pippin and the Ents attacking Saruman. So it's not just the Helm's Deep battle, right? But you're getting another angle as well. So what's our next question here, John? I think it was...
Well, why is this my favorite?
Yeah, why is this still your favorite out of the trilogy?
I think to me, like, it just has the least amount of flaws. And I obviously really like all three of these movies. It's one of my favorite trilogies, franchises in movie history. But I feel like the beginning of the first and the end of the third are like just really, they're not bad. It's just like it's just too much. It's just bloat. And I feel like this one really doesn't have much of that. It's like a weirdly tight 3-hour movie. Just at least insofar as like, I feel like every scene has a purpose, and like, the characters are well developed without like having to be like, beaten over the head with it. And I feel like, it does a really good job.
Is there a way that you can rank the three different... No, rank the three different storylines, like Frodo and Sam, and then Pippin and Merry and the Ents, and then the three warriors there.
I would say for sure for me it's like the Aragorn storyline with going to Rohan, doing all the Rohan things, and then Helm's Deep. Like that's the most enjoyable stuff in the movie for me. And then after that I would say Frodo and Sam and Gollum, just because Gollum is such like an interesting wrinkle. I would say like when he gets kind of tied up with Faramir, it loses a little bit of steam, but not so bad. And then Merry and Pippin and the Ents, like it's kind of fun and funny, but like definitely the least important thing here as it's going on. Of course, like where it ends is very important, but I think it's really just kind of a long walk, and they talk a lot, but it's fun. It's not bad. It's just the least consequential of the three kind of like thrusts of the story.
Yeah, it seems like it's almost like filler at some cases, because they're like, oh, why can't you just hurry up and do something? And Treebeard's like, well, it takes us a long time to figure out what we're going to do.
Yeah, basically. It is funny that like Treebeard is voiced by Gimli.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, and John, are we gonna do a Two Towers episode without like repeating the stupidest line of trivia about Lord of the Rings ever?
I don't know, because I don't remember, so I guess we're not.
Yeah, John, the one where Aragorn kicked the helmet and he broke his toes.
Oh no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, there you go. I told someone new. I guess like when they're looking for Merry and Pippin, he kicks a helmet in like anger that he thinks like they've been killed or eaten or burned up, and he actually broke his toes.
That sucks. I've broken toes before. It's not fun. And I've never had to like do action scenes afterwards in a blockbuster movie. So what about you? I mean, not your favorite, but you still like are a fan, obviously, of this movie. Do you feel like it's the weakest of the trilogy because it's sort of middle child syndrome?
No, I've always felt that the third one was the weakest.
Yeah.
But Go figure. That's the one that won all the awards, right? Uh,
Well, it was really just,
uh,
I think, for the whole shebang, you know.
right, but Two Towers does have the difficulty of being the middle child, right? It has it has a ton going on in it, and so much so that they took Sheila the Spider, who actually appeared in the novel of Two
Right.
Towers, and moved her to the Return of the King, to give that story more action, I guess.
That's a good trivia
Yeah,
factoid.
that was the right decision, I think. To finish off our 20th anniversary of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, John and I are continuing our epic journey towards Mordor, and
Are
talking
you hold?
about.
I think I'm holding the ring because it's taking a physical toll on me.
Okay, so I get to be Samwise Gamgee.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. We're gonna talk about the Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King, the third movie in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the one that took home all the Oscar glory, a monumental bounty of awards.
Yeah, really like unprecedented, I think. Didn't it win like every single award that it was nominated for that year?
I believe. I think it was like 11,
It's
if I remember
crazy.
correctly. Which just is bonkers. It was just like they're like, oh well, it's time to award everybody, and you know, it's easy to see why they did that because these movies are very much supposed to be watched as a trilogy. Which I will tell you, up front, John, that this time when I watched Return of the King, I did not watch Fellowship and Two Towers before it.
Okay, yeah.
Knowing that I had seen those movies enough times and could fill in the blanks. But I will share what that's kind of like, um, doing that, even with the knowledge of going into it and how maybe like the momentum isn't the same.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
But yeah, let's get to the very beginning and where we were in 2003. I know from my experience, I was super excited for the finale. I hadn't read the books. I still haven't read the books.
No.
Um, but I knew that the first opportunity to see Return of the King was to buy a ticket for like the trilogy and like screening when they decided that they were going to have like the extended editions of Fellowship and then Two Towers and then go into the theatrical premiere of Return of the King. And that sounded great on paper, John.
Sure.
But I guess by the time I got to the theater for Fellowship, I was in a really bad seat.
Oh no.
Yeah, they people like kind of camped out and picked their seats, and when you got like when you're in the same seat for like, oh, I don't know, 10 hours, you want to have a good one. So mine wasn't great, and I think I made it through half of Fellowship, like when like after like Gandalf dies, and we and I was like, well, I've seen this, and I got things to do today. so so like I just like put something on my chair and I left and went to go do other things during the
So
day.
you decided to
And
fly, you fool?
yeah, yeah, I took the owls and came back for the Return of the King premiere later that evening and enjoyed myself. What was your experience like? Did you go to a midnight screening and when they still had midnights, or did
No,
you?
nothing quite like that. Yeah, they used to do that. How weird and quaint. No, I mean, I saw it, I think, opening weekend. I remember seeing it. I remember being like you were super hyped for it. I saw it with my dad. He was into the first two. I think I saw probably both of those with him also. And yeah, no like great story, but just that it was definitely something I was just super duper excited to see. And it at the time like really didn't disappoint.
Great. Yeah, I mean, for me, there's certainly been those movies that I've been epically like excited for, and you know, I the movie rolls credits, I sit there feeling deflated, like
Yeah, sure.
that didn't meet expectations. So like sort of like Matrix Reloaded.
Well,
Uh, um, but yeah, it met my expectations, and I was excited. And not only that, I was excited for the extended cut and everything that would add. I mean, with these movies, I was always interested in more, right? Because if you like something, you think, oh, more would be great, better. But um, I know at least with this watch, I did not watch the extended. I watched the theatrical, and out of all three of them, I prefer the theatrical of Return the King the most.
I
If
wonder
like if I have to,
why.
what?
I said, I wonder why.
Well, are you saying because it adds so much more and it makes
Yeah,
it
it's
so much
so
longer?
long already.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, I think that the timing of the theatrical Return of the King is just really great, and they did a great job of editing it and getting it down to where they did and
Hmm.
making it pretty coherent. I mean, we'll get to it later, but like, there's a scene at the end of the movie that doesn't make a whole lot of sense about the extended scenes, but yeah, we'll get there. So the movie, what I forgot that I love about this, and like all three movies have like some great um prologues or beginnings. I mean, certainly the Fellowship of the Ring has that epic intro that like sets you up and makes you familiar with the entire world of Middle Earth and what's going to happen. And then with what was it in Two Towers? Is it the battle with um I know in the extended edition that they had the battle with Gandalf in the Balrog, and
Oh,
I don't know if that's the opening of Two Towers or if
it
it's
is. Yeah.
all right. So that you have that, and then Return of the King's opening is the backstory of Gollum, also known as Smeagol at the time, and it's like a really like unsurprisingly depressing story uh where Smeagol is out on his birthday fishing with his cousin, and his cousin gets pulled under by a fish, and while he's in the water he finds the one ring, and when Gollum sees it, he's instantly compelled, well, Smeagol sees it, he's instantly compelled to violence. He asks his cousin to give it to him for his, since it's his birthday, and the cousin's like, no way, because he's already being controlled by the ring. And Smeagol acts out and without haste kills his cousin and takes the ring, and that is pretty dark. I mean, there's no question that some of Lord of the Rings, the first two movies, goes to dark places, but I think Return of the King really goes into like Peter Jackson's like horror background in some cases, not
Mm,
only with the depictions here but later with Shelob, of course.
sure.
um, but yeah, I think this beginning really hits hard and does um, a great job of giving us even more into Gollum, who had to work, right? Because like if you see him in Fellowship of the Ring, Gollum doesn't have much to do. You see, like in the CGI for him is very primitive, but like once he comes into the Two Towers and Return of the King, the CGI has to work because he's such a vital part of the story, and um, it's still great 20 years later, the work that they did with Andy Serkis and creating the character of Gollum, I think. As far as like a lot of the CGI goes in the movie, we'll talk about some of it, and some of it looks dated, but that I think still works wonderfully. Did you have any thoughts on Smeagol's prologue there? Did you?
I mean, really good. I agree. I think that, like, you know, he is in a lot of ways like the pivotal figure in the last two movies, and I presumably books. I haven't read them either. And just kind of gives the whole story this like really tragic undertone that like it doesn't ever shake.
Right, and as we learn throughout the story, that if Frodo acts on Samwise's suggestions and actually kills Gollum at any point during the story, the ultimate finale would be different, no question about it.
Yeah.
So maybe his pacifism and his sympathy towards this creature really uh, plays out in a big way.
Yeah.
We're gonna go quickly over Saruman's death because in the theatrical version they don't show it at all. It's just like they find an orb that he left behind, and that's used in the story, but they just allowed that, like, what happened at the end of Two Towers was his defeat, and you don't need to see him defeated again. Um, but they do show in the extended version Christopher Lee getting his from Worm Tongue, and both of them
Right.
being ended. Was that so? I had asked a while ago if you had watched the extendeds, and you said you were going to make an effort this time,
I
or
did. No, I saw them. I don't know if it was last year or the year before, but
right.
one of the previous recordings, I had watched those for the first time. So it was. I had never seen that scene up to that point, but yeah, I don't know. I guess like I kind of agree with you, but I would say it about all three movies. Is that like I just don't know that there's any scenes across the three extended editions that like I have to have. And the movies themselves are long enough, and the theatrical versions totally worked for me. So I can't say that like I think any of them are critical, but yeah, I mean, if you need to see what happens to Saruman, then here you go. You that wish is granted. And you know what was unsaid in the theatrical cut is said in the extended version.
Right. And yeah, I don't necessarily I think like it's something that they were fair to cut out, and that's something I can leverage for pretty much every decision. I think I told you maybe when we were doing Two Towers is that like everybody's kind of have a different way of how they like the movie, and like if there was like a scene selection before it started where I could pick and choose like which extended scenes that I liked and like could include those and skip the other ones, that would be like ultimately the uh the a la carte way to watch the Lord of the Rings movies, because there's like in each extended edition there's maybe like at least 3 or 4 scenes that I wish the theatrical had,
Uh-huh.
and then everything else I could just be like, yeah, sure, I can
Yeah.
take it or leave it. So that's probably where I am on that. One of my favorite sequences comes like halfway, well, I want to say like an hour into um the Return of the King, and this is after King and not King, he's decidedly not a king, and that's what a lot of the drama comes from. He's like the protector of Gondor. He's not necessarily the leader, which is Denethor, which is the father of Boromir and Boromir, and he is um fully losing his mind, and he refuses to ask uh the the other city for help. And so I guess one of the hobbits has to go up and secretly light the lanterns in order to have what is it, Ronan or
Rohan.
Rohan come and help. And uh, he sneakily does it, and there's this epic scene where like these towers are lit, and
Mm-hmm.
from one mountain to another, and you have to like have some disbelief in it, because you have to imagine like these guys just like live up there permanently,
Yeah.
and like with nobody around them, and just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna wait like 20 years and see if they need me to light the
Or
lantern.
that like you couldn't get fooled by just like somebody like lighting a thing on fire on a mountain.
Right. And I mean it's very silly like to imagine like how that whole thing is set up, and like the system that it works, but yeah, it theatrically, it's very cinematic and really cool to watch, and
Yeah.
seeing the beacons lit all along Middle Earth, and I really like that scene. It's pretty epic. Uh, Sweeping camera music, the big
Oh
orchestral
yeah.
score, the Howard Shore score
And
comes
you
in.
get Viggo Mortensen kind of busting in, being like, "Yeah, it's here. Let's go.
Yeah, they've lit the
They
beacons.
have called for aid."
Yeah, I'm a big fan of lighting the beacons. Um, then the next sequence that I want to talk about, and I read an article on Polygon about this, John, was the epic bread fight that happens as Frodo, Gollum, and Samwise are heading towards Shelob's lair, and at the time it's like shown that like Samwise is fighting that like he didn't eat all the bread, and like Gollum kind of set him up to like fail,
Yeah.
and then like they get into a fight, and Frodo's like, "Go home," and Sam's like, "Yeah, all right, I'll go home." And it's
And
like,
they're like up on this thing, like
right,
like
they're up on like half like on the side of a cliff,
yeah.
and like Samwise has come all this way. There's no way he's gonna like make it back by himself. And then like some things happen, and like he ends up like finding the bread at the bottom, and it's
Hmm.
like, and he gets like the idea that he has to go back and save Frodo, but it's like he already knew that he was innocent. Why did it take him going down the hill and finding the bread that he didn't eat to remind him of that to go back up? It's just a plot contrivance to like make some kind of drama. And like I read in the book, that sequence never happens. It's just a way of theatrically making it so that Frodo and Sam have some kind of strife and get disconnected. Um, and you know, when you watch the scene and you're into the movie, you're not like thinking like how illogical it is,
Yeah.
because the movie is holding your interest, and you're along for the ride, and you're like, oh yeah, maybe he just got his second wind back when he saw that bread, and like he realized like, no, I'm not gonna let him dissuade me from doing this. I'm gonna go back up.
Right.
So you can go for the ride, but yeah, I thought it was a silly sequence worth talking about. Do you have any ill thoughts with the bread sequence?
I never thought anything of it. I did not know this was a controversy, but I hear like the points you're making, and I get it. It is a little bit silly when you talk about it like that.
Yeah. Um, I guess like one of the other like for Aragorn's story in this one and why the movie is called Return of the King. Spoiler. I mean, like you could look at the movie and say, oh, Return of the King, maybe Sauron coming back is the Return of the King, but nope. It's Aragorn, and he finishes his king journey in this movie,
Hmm.
and one of the big segments comes when Liv Tyler's elf lady decides she sees a vision, and she sees that there's a possible positive future in her life, and there's a child, and she decides that she's going to forego going to the other lands on the boat, and she's going to go back to Aragorn and support him, if it means aging out. And so she has the classic sword redone, all that. But they the sequence then is like they're like, oh well, you don't have enough men to fight Mordor, so you need to take yourself and go into this cave of dead people and convince them to fight for you. And you know what? If you have a whole bunch of dead people fighting for you, it's got to be kind of hard to defeat them.
Yeah.
Yeah, he takes his sword and goes into this cave, and you know he asks all these dead ghosts to help him. And another thing on paper that sounds kind of silly, but it works. And of course, Gimli and Legolas are in for the ride, and Their banter is also
Oh yeah, always
a lot
great.
of fun in these movies. And in Two Towers they had this running gag where they were counting like how many orcs they took down, and that returns a little bit in um, the battle and Return of the King outside of Minas Tirith. And I don't know, I think the Ghosts Cave pirates are pretty cool.
I like those guys.
Yeah. Yeah, you like that sequence?
Yeah, I think it's good. I think they're like less fun when they actually fight because it's just like, I mean, we'll get to the CGI questions, but
Yeah.
it's just green, like, you know, like kind of vague green mist, just destroying everything in sight in 10 seconds. But I think like in the cave they're interesting, and they kind of like do an arrow thing, or there's a sword where they try to like strike Aragorn down, and he puts his sword to his to the ghosts, and it's like nobody, only one sword could do this. He's like, yes, my sword. So I think that stuff is I like it a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I don't mind it, and it's certainly something unless you're like familiar with the story, it's not something you would expect. I mean, there's certainly
Definitely
magic.
not. I agree with that.
Yeah, there's definitely magic in the world of Middle Earth, but
Sure.
that takes it like a whole another layer. So I'm gonna match everything up now, John, and we're gonna match the Shelob and the elephants and the CGI hold up question all in one big bubble here,
Fair enough.
because I feel like whether or not the CGI holds up has a lot to do with Shelob and the elephants
Yeah.
and those big creatures. Um, I know as far as like the CGI holding up and like you seeing the battlefield, like that's fine. That works perfectly well.
Yeah.
You're seeing all these like random digits on the ground. They don't really have to be that clear. Where it gets a little more sloppy is the stuff with Shelob in the cave and how the spider moves, and um, while it worked perfectly back in the day, now you're like, oh well, that's you for a fact like the camera's just situated on this like open circle and like they're CGIing the spider in, and
Yeah.
you're like, yeah, I don't know how I feel about this. I think it works better, surprisingly, when Shelob is out in the open and Sam is having to fight with Shelob.
Yeah.
I think that stuff is really clear and good. I think the stuff in the cave when Frodo's running from Shelob doesn't work as well.
I don't have like a strong take. I never really had like any objections to it. I feel like my bigger the CGI doesn't hold up in this franchise in general is some of the like big mostly in the I mean I remember it more from the second movie, but I think also qualifies in the third movie, just like the vastness of the battlefield and the armies marching, like the further away you are, like kind of the faker that looks. um but the creatures, I believe you. It's just nothing kind of jumps out in my mind's eye of like, oh my gosh, yeah, that was egregious.
Yeah, there's one sequence again of Legolas. He seems to be the guy
Oh, I
on
know
the
which one you're talking about.
yeah.
Actually, yeah,
He takes down an elephant by
yeah.
himself, and
That's
um,
not that great. That's not that great.
yeah, that looks kind of silly. But a lot of the close up of the orc stuff works really well because it was a lot of makeup and practical effects
Yeah, sure,
um,
right.
to make some of those characters work. And they did. Peter Jackson and his writing partners did a really smart idea, and obviously a series of smart ideas for the movie. Um, and to make it almost like there was a general on the battlefield
Yeah,
controlling this army, and it made almost like a focal point for you to follow, even if there were only like maybe 20 real actors around there.
yeah.
It worked to give you that idea that maybe there was thousands upon thousands. I so like that some of the stuff works. There's one scene, John, that like I absolutely like loathe now, and it's right near the end of the movie, and it's of Elijah Wood's Frodo running into Mordor, like the tower at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it looks so obvious, like CGI, like he's running on air. And I'm like that one shot, like I know like people hate when directors go back and like fix things and stuff like that, and I agree with them, but like seeing that shot, it's like there's had to have been a better way for them to do it. But yeah, I mean, on the whole, I think the CGI of the movie is more apparent now, 20 years later. Certainly in these high definition formats at home.
Yeah.
You know, John, I was watching the new 4K of Titanic as well.
Oh.
And you know, that came out 5 years earlier than Return of the King and had amazing special effects for the time. But now when you look at it, you're like, oh well, they're going over the boat, and like, you know, like every person on that boat is CGI on this big like helicopter shot of it, and it's just like, oh well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is what it is. But yeah, I think what needed to be done, and like I said, Gollum needed to be the strongest, and I still think he is, and that a lot to do was with the decision that they made to make it like a full body capture, and for the most part, he feels like a real character in that space, which is vital to these movies.
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk about maybe like 2 or 3 more sequences that I really love, John. And one of them is this Witch King sequence with this character that's like the head of the race.
It's like Gandalf's vice president.
Yeah.
Or not Gandalf's,
Sauron's. Yeah. And this whole thing, like, no man can kill me, and like, it just has like a really good setup where then you have Miranda Otto's character like out on the battlefield that everybody has told her no, she's a woman, she should stay at home and protect the castle, and she's like, you know what, F this. And she and one of the hobbits work together to end the Witch King, and she's like, I am no man, and you know, stabs him in the face, and it's great. A fantastic sequence.
It sort of you know, predicts the sequence in Avengers Endgame of like all the female characters getting a moment to like do a superpower thing. You know, I felt like that was just kind of like this, you know, breath of feminism that kind of makes its way into this big CGI filled action epic. Yeah, definitely like it holds up, and it at the time it landed really well in the theater. I remember like people having just a big reaction to that.
Yeah, and like I think there's this like joke, and well, there's plenty of memes about Lord of the Rings, but like one of them is like, what's the only scene where like a woman talks to a woman in like the whole movie, and it's like when like these 2 women are like hiding in Helm's Deep or something.
Yeah, there's really like 2 named women characters in the whole thing.
Yeah. So it's nice that she has her sequence there. One of the big like side projects of the Return of the King story is this idea of Boromir and him not being Boromir in his father's eyes, to the point where like he comes back after trying to defend this coast position, and like he's nearly dead, not dead yet though. And his father's, you know, lost his mind. He's like, all right, let's burn us both alive, or what have you. It's kind of ridiculous.
That guy's crazy.
Yeah. But there's a scene later, John, and why I wanted to bring up Boromir now with Miranda Otto's character, and it's like they show up.
Oh yeah, at the very
movie,
end.
Yeah, side by side, and you're like, Wow, do
Are
they
you
know
are
each
you trying
other?
to ship them? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think there's something in the appendixes that does ship those two
Yeah, I
characters
think you're
together.
right.
But like you wouldn't know that because a lot of that is excised from the movie, and like um you know at least if they could get like, if that's a happy ending for them, it could be, because like both of those characters, have a lot of tragedy in this story.
Yeah, you said that.
um but then we're getting to the finale, John, and one of my favorite sequences, and I'm sure it's the same for everybody, is not the sequence where Sean Astin, Samwise Gamgee's going up the tower and has to save Frodo, because that's kind of ridiculous and just like an event of luck, because like all the orcs kind of like kill each other
Yeah.
while he's trying to go up there. Um, but it's when Frodo seems like he's on his last leg and he can't carry himself up the tower. And the whole movie, it's like he's fighting with Sam. He's like, Sam, don't take the ring. You can't take the ring. You can't do it. It's my burden. And Sam's like, well, guess what? I'm going to carry you now. And I don't know. That sequence works on so many levels.
Yeah.
It shouldn't. It seems silly. Um, it's a tragedy that Sean Astin wasn't nominated for like best supporting
I
actor,
agree.
and like given like all the love for this movie.
I agree.
Because like if you want to say like maybe Gandalf was the heart of the first one, and that's why um Ian McKellen got like an Oscar nomination for it, then you'd have to say that Sean Astin is absolutely the heart of Return of the King.
Oh, no doubt. I could 100% agree.
Um, and yeah, I love him in this. And when they get into Mordor, finally, Aragon and company decide that they're going to make a diversion to make it so that all the orcs leave Mordor, and Frodo and Sam can get in there. And that'd be well and good, but Gollum tries to stop them, and mirroring what we saw in Fellowship of the Ring, Frodo hesitates when he gets the opportunity to destroy the ring finally, and he decides that he's going to keep it, and much to the disappointment and woe of Sam. And you would think that would be the end, but due to them not killing off Gollum at any point, Gollum makes an effort to get the ring himself, and fights Frodo all the way to the very end. And I saw someone talking about today, and I agree with them wholeheartedly that it's just a really awesome sequence, seeing like Gollum fall backwards into the lava and like get swallowed up by the lava until like the ring is like just sitting on top of like this burnt crusted ember, and like it's just enough to make you think like, is Frodo that mentally gone that since the ring still exists on some kind of
Mm-hmm.
ember, that like he'll let go and drop and try to get the ring, even though he knows fully well that it's futile and he'd die doing it, whether or not he's fully that gone. And I don't know. I really think that that's a nice take on the material, and really excellent sequence. I mean, like one of the things that visually had trouble, John, was like this idea, and it exists in the text, is that when Frodo puts the ring on, he's invisible, and then Gollum is like on his back fighting him.
Yeah, it looks a little weird.
Yeah, it looks it doesn't work visually.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Um, I mean, like when you could think about it in a novel, like with your mind, it's like, yeah, sure, maybe that makes sense. But like seeing it like come to fruition on the film, it's a weird minute or so.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and then ultimately they win the day, and Frodo and Sam sit on the mountain there, probably gonna get eaten alive by lava. Um, they say that they're happy to be together at the end of all things, which is the quote there. And luckily, uh, Gandalf finds them on the owls, which is one of the other arguments, John. Like if they had access to these things that could fly to Mordor, like right at the beginning of the movie,
Yeah, I know.
why didn't they just use them? And like cut out all three books. But obviously that's not what they decided to do. That would ruin the whole story. And maybe we could pretend that Mordor had some kind of anti-air defense.
Sure.
And like maybe the ring race would have taken them down, and that's why they couldn't use the owls to drop the ring off there.
I suppose that's possible.
They're trying to give Tolkien an out here. And then comes like one of the controversial sections, right, John? Because people say this movie's long enough, and like it felt, at least theatrically, that it felt like it had 4 or 5 different endings.
Yeah.
Especially how they decided to cut between sequences, and like even like 5 seconds of dead air, or blackness, or white screen, you just think, oh, this is the end.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the last sequence you see with Sam, and his words, and seeing his wife Rosie and everything, and his child, he does repeat the same line in the book. I do have the books at home. I just haven't read them, and confirmed that it is the same line that Tolkien wrote in the book. And what's different, John, and I don't know how much you know about the novels compared to the movies, and this was certainly something I did the last few days reading this, was that Frodo in the books isn't just broken from his journey, and like feeling like maybe he's always going to be towards the ring or this adventure, and how could he possibly go back to a normal life after that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it happens because there's this chapter near the end of the Return of the King. It's sort of like the Shire was also kind of destroyed or taken over,
Right.
and so like the Shire isn't what he remembers, and like nothing will ever be the same.
Right.
And so he kind of gets like defeatist about that too, and that's when he makes his ultimate decision to leave and go west. But the argument is like, could they have really done another ending sequence where like they had to get everybody together to go like save the Shire? I don't think so.
No.
Theatrically, like you beat the big bad.
Right. Yeah.
It's time to go home.
Needs to be done.
That they have a lot of sequences, right, where they give Aragorn the crown and name him king, and he finally sees Liv Tyler's character again. They get together happy, and there's this great sequence, and it's quoted all over Letterboxd if you see it. Reviews of this is like, no, my friends, you bow for no one.
Yeah.
And if you watch all 3 of those movies in a row and get to that sequence and don't cry,
it's good.
Yeah, it's a real good sequence. It's like everybody's like bowing for the hobbits, and you realize just like, oh, men definitely would have fallen if it weren't for these 4 hobbits and what they accomplished.
Yeah, at least 2 of them.
Well, you don't think Merry and Pippin really contributed? They did the ants and 2 Towers, right?
Yeah.
So they had a part to play.
Yeah, that was all right.
And then of course the big surprise at the end for people who haven't read the books, they all go say goodbye to Gandalf and Bilbo and everybody, and Gandalf turns around and he's like, well, it's time to go, Frodo.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh God, Frodo's leaving too. Oh, I can't believe this. He's leaving his friend behind after everything they've been together. And if that doesn't get you,
that's that, and that's it. And there he goes.
Yeah, and into the West.
I think Elrond's on there, and
Kate Blanchett.
Yeah. Tar
the
herself.
Yeah, the other elf dude, I think.
It's like the idea of Tar like popping up here and
Yeah,
hanging
yeah.
out.
Um, yeah. That's the end of Lord of the Rings. Do I don't know. Did you watch it in the last few days,
I did
or
not. No, I
all right?
watched it earlier this year. I did not have a chance to. I did not have a chance to rewatch it this week.
That's fine. Do you find that you like the movie anymore now? I know, like from previous years that we've talked, like Two Towers is ultimately your favorite,
Yeah, it
and
is.
but I don't know if this one is better than Fellowship for you nowadays, or equal, or less than, or
I think this is the worst one, but I still think it's really good. I just think it's too long. I mean, that's really all there is to it. Like, I think it still holds up. It's exciting. It's emotionally satisfying. I think that if you look at the whole trilogy, I think the first hour of Fellowship is bloated, and I think the last hour of Return of the King is bloated, and that's why I think Two Towers is the best one.
okay, that's fair. So yeah, for me, ultimately, like I said when we were covering this, I decided that I was just gonna watch Return of the King this
Yeah.
time because, like, due to time constraints, and I think the last time I tried to watch all three of them, I made it like halfway through Return of the King, and then like I didn't finish it for whatever reason, and I was just like, well, I could just watch Return of the King, and you lose this idea of the epic journey when you just start a Return of the King. I mean, I don't know. Have you ever tried just to like randomly watch Two Towers, or do you always have to start with Fellowship?
I've never just watched Two Towers. If I'm gonna watch all these movies, I'm starting at the beginning and going through them all.
Yeah. No, I definitely see that notion, and it's hard not to agree with it after my experience with Return of the King. It wasn't like I was still happy with the beats, and it was satisfying, but maybe it was missing the how emotionally satisfying it could have been had I had that journey over the 9 hours. And if you've never seen the first two movies and then try again to Return of the King, forget about it.
Well, yeah, that's just silly.
I mean, well, more so than almost any other trilogy, John. I think that it's hard. I mean, like how built up with this is there's no like real good entryway because these movies are really meant to be seen as a trilogy. I was telling Shannon, my wife, like some trilogies you can get in. I mean, Star Wars was never originally imagined as a trilogy, so if you just watch A New Hope, you can get away with that and be
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, I agree.
Um, for a lot of movies, it's not guaranteed that they're going to be a trilogy. So they do make the first one pretty uh beginning and end work, and then maybe they know that they're going to have at least two and three, so two and three are more connected.
Hmm.
But with Lord of the Rings, they definitely knew that they were signed on to make the three books and the three movies, and um, they definitely coherently work the best when you start at the very beginning and work your way through the end.
Yeah,
Um, and John and I ultimately will suggest that you watch the theatrical versions.
yeah, I would.
um, I know some people out there who would say blasphemy and they'll only watch the extended versions if they're going to do the journey. But I don't know. I find um, ultimately more satisfying to do the theatricals. I mean, it's the argument that they're long enough.
Yep.
Um, the argument that these films were awarded and won Oscars for their editing due to the theatrical versions, if you want another way of looking at it. But yeah, it's funny, John, that like you and I ultimately think that The Return of the King is the lesser of the three movies.
I think that's the common consensus at this point.
I wish I felt differently. I wish I felt that it was the best for some reason. Like maybe like the most rewarding or the most satisfying, or me, I prefer Fellowship of the Ring the best, and
Right.
um it's just um, ultimately, I guess how you feel about them. I mean, I'd like to find someone, John, who does prefer Return of the
I'm
King
sure
over
there's
Two
people.
Towers.
I'm sure there's people who
Yeah,
do.
over Two Towers and Fellowship of the Ring, and find out why exactly it works ultimately for them that
Yeah.
much. Or if they just say to me because it pays off Fellowship and Two Towers, then I don't know if that's enough.
Well, that's your opinion. And if people feel like it is, then I don't begrudge them that.
Alrighty. So that was our Lord of the Rings trilogy. 20 years. I don't think we'll do it again at 25 years. That's too soon, considering now we're
Yeah,
two
for
two
real.
years 2 years away from Fellowship again. But yeah, I enjoyed this. I mean, I love the movies, and they've been watched many times in my household over the
Oh,
years.
me
And
too. Yeah.
um, John, for a lot of people of a certain age, like Star Wars was their trilogy and most important. But I think for us, for our age, it's got to be Lord of the Rings, and some people will probably look at Harry Potter too, as well, given that series and how it played out with the world. But for me, probably Lord of the Rings is the one I'm most fond of.
Yeah. Agreed. Me too.